My father came to my tiny, cramped apartment and asked, "Why don't you just live in your beautiful house, dear?" Then, suddenly, my husband walked in from outside. He screamed at my father. "What? The house? That house belongs to my mother now. If you have a problem with that, I'll divorce your daughter right now." My husband had no idea who he was dealing with. After that day, what my father did would change my husband's life and his family's forever. But before the story begins, please let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe so this channel can grow and bring you even more compelling stories. The rattling hum of an old, rusty box fan dominated the silence in the cramped living room. The air inside the walk-up apartment was stuffy and hot, as if its stained walls were closing in on anyone inside. Amelia sat anxiously on the edge of a wooden chair whose cushions had long gone flat. Opposite her sat a middle-aged man dressed in very simple clothes. The man wore a worn-out shirt with a slightly loose button and a pair of trousers that had started to fade. His face was calm, yet his eyes radiated a combination of tranquility and a hard-to-explain firmness. This was Harrison Blackwell, Amelia's father. Harrison looked around the room. His eyes swept over the peeling paint on the walls, the cracked linoleum floor, and the sparse, mismatched furniture. There was no disgust in his gaze, only a deep sadness he tried to hide from his daughter. He took a long breath, the smell of a neighbor's cooking and street dust wafting in through an open vent. He looked at his daughter intently. Amelia looked thin. Her beautiful face was etched with lines of exhaustion. Though she tried to smile to welcome her father, the simple, modest scarf she wore framed a face that was timidly bowed. Harrison finally broke the silence, his tone gentle yet full of emphasis. He asked, "Why does Amelia choose to suffer like this? Why don't you just live in your beautiful house, dear?" The question hung in the air. Amelia was silent. She wrung her hands. She didn't dare to look her father in the eye. She knew her father was disappointed, not because Amelia was poor, but because she was allowing herself to be degraded. Amelia answered in a soft voice that she wanted to be a devoted wife to her husband. She wanted to start everything from scratch with Kevin. She believed that struggling together would eventually yield sweet results. However, Harrison knew it was more than just a struggle. He saw an injustice being done to his daughter. Suddenly, the sound of a sputtering car engine cut out harshly in front of the building. The sound of a car door slamming shut echoed loudly, followed by heavy footsteps approaching. The front door flew open without a knock. Kevin entered, his face red and slick with sweat. He had just come home from work and seemed to have brought all his frustrations from the office with him. Kevin threw his work bag onto the worn-out sofa, sending a small cloud of dust into the air. His eyes then fell upon Harrison, who sat calmly in the guest chair. Kevin's expression changed instantly. It wasn't respect that appeared, but disgust and anger. He looked his father-in-law up and down with a condescending gaze. To Kevin, Harrison was just a useless old man, who was nothing but a burden. Kevin didn't know who the old man before him really was. All he knew was that this father-in-law had never given him any money or business capital. Kevin snorted contemptuously. He walked closer, aggressively loosening his tie. He asked in a loud voice, "What is that old man doing here?" Amelia stood up, trying to calm her husband. She said her father had just dropped by for a short visit to see how they were doing, but Kevin didn't care. He felt tired, and the presence of a guest he considered poor only added to his stress. Kevin started bringing up their financial problems. He said the groceries in the kitchen were gone, and he didn't have extra money to entertain guests, especially guests who brought nothing with them. The words were sharp and hurtful. Amelia held back her tears. She was embarrassed in front of her father. Harrison remained seated calmly. He wasn't provoked in the slightest. He looked at his son-in-law with a flat, unreadable expression. Then, in a deep voice, he repeated the question he had asked Amelia earlier, but this time, he directed it so Kevin could hear. He asked about the house. He mentioned that Amelia had a right to a more decent place to live. That simple question became the spark that ignited Kevin's already smoldering anger. Kevin exploded. He shouted right in his father-in-law's face. His voice boomed through the small room, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. What? The house? That house belongs to my mother now. If you have a problem with that, I'll divorce your daughter right now. The sentence came out unfiltered. Kevin felt he was on top of the world. He felt he had complete power over Amelia. He had just manipulated Amelia a few months ago into signing a property transfer document in the name of Brenda, Kevin's mother, with the excuse that it would protect their assets from progressive taxes or some other ridiculous reason that Amelia, blinded by love, had believed. Amelia was stunned to hear the threat of divorce. Her body trembled violently. She never imagined Kevin would be cruel enough to say that sacred word in front of her father. Amelia grabbed Kevin's arm, begging him not to talk like that, but Kevin roughly shook her hand off. He pointed his index finger at Harrison's face. He said he was sick of the poverty that Amelia's family brought with them. He considered Amelia and her father to be parasites. Kevin didn't know that he was pointing at the face of the man who owned a significant portion of the city's skyline. The room fell silent for a moment after the outburst. Harrison slowly rose from his chair. He straightened his worn shirt with slow, dignified movements. There was no explosive anger on his face. Instead, he smiled faintly. A smile that was chilling and terrifying. If Kevin were smart enough to understand it, Harrison looked deep into Kevin's eyes. He said softly, "All right, remember what you just said." From this moment, the countdown begins. The sentence sounded like a dark prophecy. Harrison then turned to Amelia. He gently stroked his daughter's head, which was covered by a scarf, with great affection. He whispered for Amelia to be strong because a storm was about to come. But after that, a rainbow would appear. Amelia sobbed, kissing her father's hand. Kevin just scoffed at the scene. He felt victorious. He felt he had successfully intimidated his father-in-law into leaving. Harrison walked out of the apartment without looking back at Kevin. He walked down the narrow, dirty alley. Kevin watched from the window and laughed cynically as he saw his father-in-law walking towards the main road to catch a city bus. Kevin muttered that poor people were pathetic. But Kevin didn't see what happened at the corner of the main road, hidden by a high wall. There, a gleaming black luxury sedan was waiting. Its engine was running so smoothly it was almost silent. A sturdy man in a sharp, well-tailored suit, Daniel, stood beside the open car door. Daniel bowed respectfully as Harrison approached. Harrison got into the luxurious car, leaving the heat and dust of the street outside. Inside the cool, fragrant car, Harrison's expression changed completely. The sadness in his eyes was gone, replaced by the sharp glint of a business tycoon who had just been provoked. He took a state-of-the-art smartphone from the suit jacket stored inside the car. He contacted his legal team. He ordered them to prepare all the documents. The game had just begun. Kevin had no idea who he was dealing with. Meanwhile, back in the apartment, Kevin was still grumbling. He felt satisfied having vented his emotions. He was unaware that his arrogant shout was the first nail he had hammered into his own coffin. He sat in the chair Harrison had just vacated, feeling like a king in his fragile little palace. Amelia went into the bathroom to hide her tears. She turned on the faucet so the sound of her sobs wouldn't be heard. Her heart was broken. She loved Kevin, but the humiliation of her father was an incredibly deep wound. That night, thick clouds hung in the sky. It was as if nature itself knew that karma was preparing to bring down its gavel of justice. The night grew later, but the tension inside the small apartment had not subsided. Kevin was still sitting in the living room, smoking anxiously. Cigarette smoke filled the poorly ventilated room, making the air even more suffocating. Amelia had come out of the bathroom, her eyes swollen, but she still tried to serve her husband by making him a warm cup of tea. She placed the mug on the small table in front of Kevin carefully, afraid that the slightest mistake would trigger her husband's anger again. As Kevin was about to pick up his mug, his eyes fell on an object lying on the edge of the table, a wristwatch. The watch looked old, with a leather strap that was slightly frayed at the edges. Its crystal was dull. It was Harrison's watch, left behind when he left earlier. Kevin picked up the watch roughly. He turned it over and over in his hand with a mocking gaze. He snorted, assuming his father-in-law had intentionally left this piece of junk behind for Kevin to throw away. Kevin yelled for Amelia. He asked why her father had left his trash in their house. Amelia hurried over and saw her father's watch in Kevin's hand. She asked for the watch politely, saying that she would keep it and return it later. Amelia knew that watch was very precious to her father, not because of its price, but because it was a beloved item he had worn since Amelia was a child. However, Kevin refused to give it to her. Feeling annoyed, in a sudden movement driven by baseless frustration, Kevin slammed the watch onto the linoleum floor. A loud, painful crack echoed. The watch's crystal shattered, its hands broke off, and the leather strap snapped. Amelia let out a stifled scream. She immediately knelt, picking up the pieces of the watch with trembling hands. Her tears started to fall again. She couldn't believe Kevin could be so cruel to her father's belongings. Kevin laughed dismissively. He said a junk watch like that didn't deserve special treatment. He even threatened to sweep up the rest and throw it in the trash outside. Kevin didn't know that the watch he had just destroyed was a masterpiece of world horology. It wasn't a watch from a flea market. It was a limited collector's edition with a complex movement, its value equivalent to hundreds of apartments like the one Kevin was currently living in. Harrison had deliberately allowed its appearance to look old so as not to be conspicuous, but to a trained eye, the watch was a treasure. Before Amelia could finish picking up the pieces, the front door opened again. This time, without a greeting, without a knock, a middle-aged woman in flashy clothes and excessive gold jewelry entered arrogantly. It was Brenda, Kevin's mother. Her face was covered in thick makeup that couldn't hide the wrinkles of hatred on her face. She looked around the apartment with a disgusted expression, as if she had just entered an animal pen. Kevin immediately stood up to greet his mother. His face, which had been fierce towards Amelia, now turned sweet and obedient. Brenda ignored Amelia, who was kneeling on the floor picking up trash. She sat down in the main chair and placed her expensive handbag on the table. She took out a file folder from her bag. In a shrill voice that hurt the ears, Brenda announced her purpose for coming. She brought the deed to a house. Not this apartment, but the luxury house that should have been Amelia's right. The house was bought with Amelia's savings, but was put in Kevin's name and then transferred again to Brenda. Brenda said loudly that the house was now officially hers completely. She said she wouldn't have a daughter-in-law whose family was poor and had no manners like Amelia. She accused Amelia of being a burden to Kevin's career. Brenda incited Kevin, saying that Amelia brought bad luck. Kevin, a man with no backbone, just nodded in agreement with every word his mother said. He felt validated. He felt that getting rid of Amelia was the right step toward success. Brenda then gave a shocking order. She told Kevin to kick Amelia out of the apartment that very night. Her reason was absurd. She said this apartment was also paid for with Kevin's money, so Amelia had no right to live here if she was useless. Amelia's eyes widened. She stood up to defend herself. She reminded Kevin that the rent for this apartment was paid from Amelia's remaining savings last month because Kevin's salary was spent on his mother's lifestyle. But facts didn't matter to Brenda and Kevin. Brenda just screamed louder, accusing Amelia of being calculating and not sincere with her husband. She called Amelia a disobedient wife. Kevin, who was afraid of his mother, finally followed the crazy order. He pointed to the door and told Amelia to leave. He said he would file for divorce as soon as possible. Amelia looked at her husband in disbelief. 5 years of marriage, all her sacrifices repaid with eviction in the middle of the night just because of his mother's instigation. Amelia didn't beg. She knew her self-respect was more valuable than kneeling at the feet of these greedy people. She went into the bedroom, took a small duffel bag. She only packed a few clothes and her important documents. She didn't take a single thing bought with Kevin's money, which was practically non-existent anyway. Amelia came out of the room with a resolute face. She looked at Brenda and Kevin alternately. She said softly but firmly that she would leave. She hoped they would be happy with their choice. Amelia stepped out into the dark night. The sky, which had been cloudy, finally poured down a heavy rain. Amelia walked without an umbrella. The rain soaked her body and her scarf, masking the tears streaming down her cheeks. She walked away from that apartment, away from the hellish life she had been trying to hold on to. At the end of the street, she stopped at a deserted bus stop. With a hand trembling from the cold, she reached into her wet clothes, took out her phone, and dialed a number she hadn't called in a long time to ask for help. Meanwhile, Inside the apartment, Brenda and Kevin laughed in satisfaction. They felt they had thrown out the trash. Kevin sat down again, and his eyes once more saw the broken pieces of the watch on the floor that Amelia hadn't had time to clean up completely. The back casing of the watch had come off, revealing a small engraving and a series of serial numbers and a brand name written very small but clearly. Curiosity tickled Kevin. He picked up the small metal plate. He took out his phone and typed the brand and serial number he saw there into a search engine. The search results loaded on his screen. Kevin's eyes widened, his mouth hung open. The cigarette in his lips fell to the floor. On the phone screen was a picture of a watch, exactly like the one he had just smashed. The article's headline read, "Rare masterpiece sells at auction for millions." Kevin read the price digits over and over. There were so many zeros. He felt his blood run cold. His heart pounded so hard it hurt his chest. He looked at the floor at the scattered shards of glass and watch machinery. Kevin panicked immensely. He fell to his knees, trying to piece the watch back together with trembling hands. Cold sweat poured down his temples. Brenda, seeing her son's strange behavior, asked, "What's wrong?" Kevin couldn't answer. His throat was tight. He had just destroyed something whose value could buy the dignity of his entire extended family for 7 generations. Fear began to creep up his spine. If his father-in-law owned a watch like this, then who was that shabby old man really? The question hit Kevin's head like a sledgehammer. Outside, the rain grew heavier, as if laughing at the foolishness that had only just begun for Kevin. The morning sun slipped through a gap in the apartment's poorly fitting window, illuminating Kevin's pale face. He hadn't slept all night. His eyes were red and swollen, surrounded by dark circles that made him look like a zombie. All night long, he had rummaged through the trash cans in front of the building, searching for the remains of the watch he had smashed. But strangely, the pieces had vanished without a trace. There were no gears, no shards of glass, not even the leather strap. Kevin felt he was going insane. He began to doubt his own sanity. Had he misread the information on the internet last night? Or did someone take the pieces secretly while he was distracted? Fear haunted him. If the watch was truly genuine and his father-in-law demanded compensation, Kevin knew he could work for 100 years and still not be able to pay for it. With sluggish steps and a chaotic mind, Kevin forced himself to go to work. Throughout the journey on his financed, beat-up car, he imagined the worst-case scenarios. He imagined the police waiting for him in the office lobby, or a termination letter already on his desk due to his declining work performance lately. Upon arriving at the office building, Kevin walked with his head down, avoiding eye contact. His heart pounded every time he saw a security guard, afraid they would drag him out. He had just sat down at his cramped desk when the phone on his desk rang shrilly. The voice of the director's secretary came from the other end, ordering him to report to the CEO on the top floor immediately. Cold sweat poured down Kevin's back. "This is the end of me," he thought. With trembling knees, he took the elevator to the executive floor. The elevator doors opened, revealing a luxurious, thickly carpeted hallway he rarely set foot on. He knocked on the office door with a sweaty hand. A deep voice invited him in. Inside the cold room, the director sat behind his large desk, staring at Kevin with a sharp gaze. Kevin bowed his head, ready to receive a scolding or a termination letter. He had already prepared his defense in his head, even ready to kneel and beg for mercy. However, what happened next left Kevin gaping in disbelief. The director stood up, smiling broadly, and extended his hand. He congratulated Kevin. He said the company was undergoing a major restructuring and they needed ambitious young people to lead the main branch in the city center. Kevin was chosen to be the new branch manager with full authority over operations and finances. Kevin was frozen. It took his brain a few seconds to process this information. Instead of being fired, he was promoted. His salary tripled, plus a company car and other benefits. The fear that had been strangling Kevin since last night suddenly vanished, replaced by a wave of intoxicating euphoria. He shook his boss's hand with fiery enthusiasm. In his heart, he laughed at his own fears. It turned out he was great. It turned out luck was on his side. As for the watch, Kevin immediately came to his own conclusion to calm his heart. It must have been a fake. It was impossible for a poor old man like Harrison to own a genuine item worth millions. It must have been a high-quality replica that could fool the untrained eye. Kevin felt foolish for having been scared. He straightened his posture. His arrogance returned, even greater than before. Leaving the boss's office, Kevin felt like he was walking on clouds. He called Brenda with great excitement. He shared the good news. Brenda screamed with joy on the other end of the line, praising her brilliant son and becoming even more convinced that kicking Amelia out was the key that unlocked their fortune. According to Brenda, Amelia was a jinx who had been holding back Kevin's career all along. Kevin agreed completely. He felt free and powerful. That same afternoon, he treated his colleagues to lunch at an expensive restaurant, ordering the best dishes and the most expensive fresh juices, arrogantly showing off his new position. A few days after the appointment, Kevin began to take full control of the branch's finances. Access to the company's large operational funds was now at his fingertips. Brenda, who was never satisfied, began to whine. She complained that the interior of the luxury house they had just seized from Amelia was outdated. She wanted to replace the marble floors, buy imported crystal chandeliers, and build a new swimming pool to show off to her social club friends. The cost was enormous, far exceeding Kevin's salary, even with the promotion. At first, Kevin was hesitant, but the devil's whisper and the desire to be praised as a successful, dutiful son overcame his common sense. He saw a loophole in the office's seemingly lax financial system. He thought he could borrow the funds for a short time, disguising them as branch renovation costs or marketing expenses, and then replace the money when his annual bonus came in. Without a second thought, Kevin signed off on approvals for fictitious expenses. Millions of dollars flowed smoothly into his personal account, then were forwarded to the contractor to renovate his mother's house. Kevin was unaware that this ease was a meticulously prepared trap. In another room, far from there, Harrison was sitting in front of a large monitor displaying the company's real-time transaction data. Next to him stood Daniel and a senior auditor. They saw a red notification flashing on the screen, indicating a suspicious fund flow approved by Kevin's account. Harrison didn't order it to be stopped. Instead, he calmly sipped his warm tea. He gestured to Daniel to let the mouse eat the bait until it was full. Let him feel safe. Let him build his dream castle. Because the higher he flies, the more shattered he will be when he falls. All evidence of the transactions was recorded and neatly stored, becoming a ticking time bomb ready to be detonated at any moment. Kevin, with all his arrogance, was diligently digging his own grave, thinking he was building a throne. 2 weeks passed. The renovation of the luxury house, now occupied by Brenda and Kevin, was complete. The house looked ostentatious, far more conspicuous than the other houses in the elite complex. Its pillars were coated with excessive gold leaf, tacky lion statues adorned the gate, and a giant crystal chandelier hung in the living room, clearly visible from the main road. Brenda felt like a queen. She couldn't wait to show off her wealth to the world. She immediately sent out invitations for a housewarming party to all her acquaintances, neighbors, and even old friends who had once looked down on her. The night of the party arrived. The yard was filled with guests' cars, although most were ordinary cars, not the luxury vehicles Brenda had hoped for. Loud, tacky pop music played at full volume, slightly clashing with the quiet atmosphere of the elite complex. But Brenda didn't care. She was busy walking around in a sequined dress, greeting guests with her chin held high, telling lie after lie about her son's global business success. Kevin stood beside his mother, wearing an expensive suit bought with embezzled money, smiling proudly, enjoying the false praise from people who only came for the free food. In the midst of the party's clamor, a taxi stopped in front of the gate. The door opened, and a woman emerged who made some of the guests fall silent. It was Amelia. She had come not to cause a scene, but because Kevin had been harassing her with text messages, to immediately deliver the original house documents and the divorce papers so the legal process could be expedited. Amelia's appearance was simple yet very classy. She wore a long, beautifully flowing dress and a scarf that modestly covered her chest. There was no jewelry on her body, but her aura of calm made her look far more radiant than Brenda, who was dripping in gold. Seeing Amelia's arrival, Brenda's face soured. She immediately approached her former daughter-in-law with wide strides, intentionally raising her voice to be heard by the guests. She greeted Amelia with insults, asking if Amelia had come to beg for scraps because she no longer had money for food. The guests whispered among themselves. Some looked on with pity, others with cynicism, swayed by Brenda's words. Kevin also approached, looking at Amelia with a condescending gaze, demanding the documents she brought without a hint of remorse. Amelia handed over the folder she was carrying with composure. She said softly that she just wanted all matters to be settled and to have no further connection with this family. However, Brenda wasn't satisfied until she had utterly humiliated Amelia. She snatched the folder, then deliberately dropped a plate of oily food towards Amelia's feet. Thick sauce stained the hem of Amelia's dress. Brenda laughed cunningly, pretending it was an accident. Then, in a commanding tone, she ordered Amelia to clean up the mess. She even pointed towards the back kitchen, saying that a poor woman like Amelia's place was at the sink, not in this magnificent living room. Kevin just stood by and watched his mother treat Amelia this way. He even chuckled, feeling that Amelia deserved to be taught a lesson for daring to defy them in the past. Amelia took a deep breath, suppressing the turmoil in her chest. She looked into Kevin's eyes one last time, searching for any remnant of conscience in the man she once loved. But she found only emptiness and arrogance. Just as Amelia was about to turn and leave, refusing to be treated with any more indignity, the atmosphere suddenly turned tense. The giant crystal chandelier in the living room flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. Not just the living room light. All the lights in the house went out. The music stopped abruptly. Darkness enveloped the party. The guests started to panic and murmur loudly. Kevin shouted for a servant to check the circuit breaker, thinking it was just a simple short circuit due to an overloaded power supply. But when he looked out the window, he realized something strange. The street lights and the neighbors' houses were shining brightly. Only this house was pitch black, like a dead island in a sea of light. Amid the confusion, from the front gate, the beams of incredibly bright car headlights pierced the darkness. Not just one, but a convoy of 3 luxurious black sedans drove in, blocking the exit. The car doors opened in unison. Several well-built men in security uniforms got out, followed by a man in glasses carrying a briefcase. It was the legal team from the Blackwell Group. Kevin ran to the front angrily, yelling at who dared to cause a disturbance at his house. The lawyer was not intimidated in the slightest. With the help of the car headlights that blinded Kevin, the lawyer read a document in a loud voice. He stated that the land on which this house stood was an asset of the Blackwell Group with a building use right status. According to the agreement's clause, any form of renovation or structural change to the building without written permission from the landowner was a serious violation, resulting in the immediate and unilateral termination of the right of occupancy. Kevin was dumbfounded. He tried to argue, saying the house deed was in his mother's name. The lawyer smiled faintly and explained that what Brenda owned was only the physical building, but the land belonged to the company and was leased on a long-term basis. And because Kevin had renovated it completely without permission, using company money no less, the land lease contract was legally void as of that night. The lawyer gave an ultimatum: vacate the house now, or the security team would assist in moving their belongings out. Brenda shrieked hysterically, accusing them of being fraudsters. She tried to attack the lawyer but was restrained by security officers. The party guests, who had been admiring them moments ago, began to retreat, whispering fearfully at the sight of law enforcement and the imposing men. One by one, the guests fled the party that had turned into a disaster. Amelia was still standing there, in the shadows of the darkness, watching karma work so swiftly. She saw Kevin, pale as a ghost, his body trembling violently, not from the cold, but from the terror of the reality that had just hit him. Daniel emerged from one of the cars and approached Amelia. With an attitude of utmost respect, a stark contrast to how everyone else there had treated her, Daniel invited Amelia into the car to be driven home. Kevin saw this scene. He saw the trusted assistant, whom he once thought was an Uber driver, now opening the door of a luxury car for the wife he had just thrown out. Kevin's brain froze, unable to process what was really happening. That night, the housewarming party turned into an eviction night. Under the sharp glare of the car headlights, Kevin and Brenda stood like defendants who had just been sentenced, while Amelia drove away, leaving the darkness that was beginning to swallow her ex-husband and mother-in-law. The atmosphere in the family court was cold and formal, a stark contrast to the hot air outside the building. Kevin sat in the plaintiff's chair, his leg bouncing restlessly. Not because he was nervous about the divorce, but because he was impatient to end this bond and take what he considered his right. Next to him, Brenda sat with an arrogant expression, her eyes constantly glaring at Amelia, who sat calmly across the table. Amelia was accompanied by a young, unassuming lawyer whose eyes were sharp. The agenda for the day was the final mediation and the division of marital assets. Kevin, who had been blinded by rage since the eviction incident, was now trying to claw back whatever was left. He knew that Amelia owned a small fabric and boutique shop in a busy wholesale district. The shop was started by Amelia at the beginning of their marriage with capital, whose origin Kevin never knew. He assumed it was Amelia's savings. Kevin had never cared about the shop, feeling it was beneath him to deal with a market business. But he knew its revenue was stable. The mediator asked about the asset division agreement. Without preamble, Kevin immediately made his demand. He demanded full ownership of the shop as compensation. He reasoned that during their marriage, much of his salary was spent on household needs, a blatant lie, as his money was mostly spent on his mother's lifestyle, so he felt entitled to that productive asset. Brenda added fuel to the fire, whispering loudly that it was fair compensation since Amelia had been living off them all this time. Amelia's lawyer tried to interrupt politely, advising Kevin to reconsider his demand. He hinted that taking over the shop's ownership meant taking over all its assets, along with its liabilities. However, the warning was ignored by Kevin. In his mind, he only imagined the daily profits of the shop that he could use to rent a luxury apartment after being kicked out of the house. He snapped at Amelia's lawyer, accusing him of trying to scare him so Amelia wouldn't lose her source of income. Amelia looked at Kevin with an unreadable expression. There was pity in her eyes, but it was overshadowed by firmness. She asked Kevin softly if he was sure he wanted the shop entirely and to release Amelia from all responsibilities related to the business. Kevin replied firmly and loudly that he was absolutely sure. He even challenged Amelia to sign the transfer of rights documents right then and there. Amelia took a deep breath and then nodded to her lawyer. The documents were prepared, the pen was signed. In a matter of minutes, the shop officially became Kevin's property. The session concluded with the divorce set to be finalized soon. Kevin and Brenda left the courtroom with wide smiles. They felt they had won a landslide victory. Kevin imagined himself becoming a successful shop owner, sitting back and counting money. They decided to go directly to the shop in the wholesale district to inspect it and inform the employees that the new boss had arrived. When they reached the storefront, Kevin saw that it was closed. The metal security gate was rolled down tight. He was confused. The shop should have been open and busy at this hour. As he was about to force the lock open, a government-plated sedan and two vans suddenly pulled up in front of the shop. Several people in IRS uniforms and a few tough-looking men holding thick folders got out. They approached Kevin, who was still holding the lock. One of the IRS agents asked if he was indeed Kevin, the new owner of this shop, according to the deed just finalized in court. Proudly, Kevin puffed out his chest and confirmed it. The agent smiled faintly and handed him a thick, officially sealed envelope. At the same time, the men from the vans also stepped forward, handing him a stack of overdue invoices. Kevin opened the envelope with a trembling hand. His eyes bulged at the numbers written inside. It was an official tax levy notice. The shop had apparently been delinquent on its sales tax and corporate income tax for 5 consecutive years, plus crippling late fees and interest. The total was in the millions of dollars. Before Kevin could catch his breath, the debt collectors from the imported textile vendors spoke up. They explained that the supply of goods to Amelia's shop had been on a special consignment basis, guaranteed by a third party. But since the ownership had changed, that guarantee was automatically voided, and all outstanding invoices for the goods in the warehouse had to be paid in cash today. Otherwise, they would seize the personal assets of the shop's owner until the debt was settled. Kevin felt his legs turn to jelly. He finally realized that the shop had been running smoothly, not because of huge profits, but because of secret subsidies and guarantees from Harrison Blackwell, who had been covering all the operational costs so Amelia could learn business without pressure. Now that protective umbrella had been removed. Kevin stood under the hot sun, holding bills whose value was far greater than the price of both his kidneys. Brenda, who had been so arrogant moments ago, was now pale, hiding behind her son. The agents didn't care. They began to plaster large stickers reading "Under Seizure" and "Asset Lien" on the shop's security gate. Kevin screamed in frustration. The marital asset he had forcefully taken was not gold, but a time bomb that had just exploded in his hands. He was officially a millionaire, but in the form of debt. The days following the incident at the shop passed like a nightmare for Kevin. His phone rang incessantly, terrorized by tax collectors and vendors. He had to hide in a cheap, musty boarding house, far from the standard of living he dreamed of. Kevin's only hope, now, was his job. He was still the branch manager. He thought if he could win over the new company owner who was scheduled to visit today, maybe he could get a big bonus or a company loan to cover his gaping debt. That morning, the branch office was exceptionally busy. All employees were ordered to be neat and clean. Kevin wore his best suit, which was starting to get wrinkled because he hadn't had time to get it dry cleaned. He stood in front of the office restroom mirror, spraying cheap cologne to cover the smell of cold sweat that kept pouring out due to his nerves. He practiced his smile and the flattering lines he would deliver. He was confident that with his charm and the financial reports he had slightly manipulated to look good, he could save his career. At 10 a.m. sharp, a convoy of luxury cars entered the office building's parking lot. Kevin and the management team lined up in the lobby to welcome the big boss. The main car door opened. Out stepped an old man in a very elegant gray suit, accompanied by several well-built bodyguards and a legal team. Kevin's heart stopped. The man was Harrison Blackwell. But his appearance this time was far different from the shabby old man he had kicked out of his apartment. This time, Harrison radiated an aura of absolute power. Every step he took seemed to shake the lobby floor. Behind Harrison, a young woman in a modest but professional blazer and a stylish scarf got out. She carried a leather briefcase and a tablet. Kevin squinted, then his eyes widened in shock. It was Amelia. His ex-wife walked with confident strides, her chin held high. Her gaze was sharp and professional. This was not the submissive, quiet Amelia anymore. Here, she was an executive. Other employees whispered in awe at the woman's beauty and authority, without knowing who she really was. The entourage passed the welcoming line without a single glance at Kevin, who stood frozen with his mouth open. They went straight to the main conference room on the top floor. Kevin, dazed, was quickly dragged by his secretary to join the meeting because he had to give a presentation. Inside the cold conference room, Harrison sat at the head of the table, the seat usually occupied by the old CEO. Amelia sat to his right, opening her tablet and examining data seriously. The meeting began. The old CEO started the meeting with a trembling voice, introducing that the Blackwell Group had officially acquired a majority stake in the company. And from this day on, Harrison Blackwell was the sole owner and chairman of the board. Kevin's knees went weak. He slumped in his chair. The world felt like it was spinning. The father-in-law he had insulted, whom he had called poor and a parasite, turned out to be the tycoon who had just bought the company he worked for. Then it was Kevin's turn to present. He stood up, trembling. Sweat poured down, soaking his shirt. He couldn't utter a single word. He just looked at Harrison with a pleading expression. Harrison raised his hand, stopping Kevin before he even began. In a calm voice that echoed throughout the room, Harrison said he didn't need a performance presentation because he already had a more accurate report. Amelia pressed a button on her tablet, and the projector screen behind Kevin changed. It wasn't sales graphs that appeared, but a series of bank transaction records, account statements showing the flow of funds from the branch's operational cash to Kevin's personal account, and then onto the accounts of building contractors and furniture stores. Everything was displayed clearly, complete with dates and amounts. The total reached millions of dollars. The conference room fell silent. All eyes turned to Kevin with looks of disgust and shock. Harrison spoke flatly, without emotion, like a judge reading a death sentence. He stated that this was not just an ethical violation, but a criminal act of embezzlement and corporate fraud. Kevin tried to deny it, stammering that it was just a temporary loan. But Amelia cut him off coldly. She read out the articles of the law that had been violated and mentioned that a forensic audit had been completed that morning. Harrison gave a signal to the head of security. The conference room door opened harshly. 2 uniformed police officers entered with an arrest warrant. Kevin panicked. He cried and wailed, trying to approach Harrison, calling him Dad, and begging for mercy for the sake of their past. But Daniel, Harrison's assistant, swiftly blocked Kevin's path, preventing him from touching his boss. Harrison looked at Kevin with a bone-chillingly cold stare. He said softly, "I don't have a thieving son, and I don't have a disrespectful son-in-law." The police immediately handcuffed Kevin's hands behind his back. The metallic click of the handcuffs sounded incredibly loud in the silent room. Kevin was dragged out of the conference room, past his colleagues who stared at him with contempt. Kevin's cries for help echoed down the office hallway, becoming a humiliating spectacle that ended his career forever. Inside the room, Amelia looked back down at her tablet, continuing the meeting as if a piece of trash had just been removed from the room. The news of Kevin's arrest spread like wildfire, not only within the office but also to Brenda's ears through a frantic phone call from one of Kevin's colleagues who still had a shred of pity. However, Brenda's reaction was beyond the comprehension of any human with a conscience. Instead of crying hysterically over the fate of her only son, now languishing behind bars, the middle-aged woman just stood frozen for a moment in the middle of the cramped apartment they had just rented the day before. Her mind raced, not to find a lawyer or visit her son, but to calculate the remaining assets she could salvage. Her selfish survival instinct took complete control. She knew very well that the embezzlement case entangling Kevin was no small matter. If the police investigated further, it was not impossible they would trace the flow of funds, most of which went to finance her lavish lifestyle and the house renovation. She was afraid of being dragged into it. She was afraid of going to jail. With trembling but nimble hands, Brenda began to rummage through the closet. She pulled out a large suitcase and started packing the few valuables she had left. Some gold jewelry she had bought last month, a watch, and a stack of cash she had hidden under the mattress. She put all the money she had squeezed from Kevin every payday into her leather handbag. She didn't pack a single piece of Kevin's clothing. To her, Kevin was now a liability. The boy had failed. He was finished and useless as a money machine. Brenda justified her actions with twisted logic. She had to save herself first so she could help Kevin later. But deep down, she just wanted to run as far away as possible from this problem. She intended to flee to another state, to a distant relative who knew nothing about the situation, to start a new life with the remaining assets she carried. Before leaving, Brenda contacted an old acquaintance, a woman named Patty, whom she used to meet at her phony socialite club meetings. Patty was known for her underground connections and often helped people who wanted to disappear without a trace. On the phone, Patty sounded very sympathetic and willing to help. Patty promised a first-class bus ticket to a city across the country for that very afternoon, with one small condition. Patty asked Brenda to carry a package for her cousin at the destination bus terminal. Patty claimed it was just a package of expensive herbal remedies and traditional supplements that were difficult to ship via regular mail because they were fragile. In return, Patty would cover all of Brenda's travel expenses and give her extra pocket money. Brenda, whose eyes always lit up at the sight of money, agreed to the offer without a second thought. She felt Lady Luck was still on her side in this critical moment. The meeting took place at a coffee shop on the way to the bus terminal. Patty arrived, handed over the ticket and a rather heavy tote bag neatly wrapped in brown duct tape. Brenda accepted it without any suspicion. Her mind was too busy imagining herself relaxing on a luxury bus, far from the police and debt collectors who might be hunting for Kevin. After the brief transaction, Brenda hurried to the passenger terminal, which was extremely crowded and chaotic that afternoon. The atmosphere was suffocating. The hot air mixed with the smell of exhaust fumes and the sweat of thousands of jostling people. Brenda walked arrogantly, bumping into people who blocked her way with her large suitcase. She looked with disgust at the porters and street vendors offering their goods. In her heart, she kept cursing, feeling she didn't belong among this crowd of lower-class people. She felt she was a great lady in disguise. She clutched her handbag, which contained her jewelry, very tightly. Her eyes were wary, suspicious of everyone who came near. However, her vigilance backfired. Her conspicuous behavior and the luxury items she wore in the middle of the shabby crowd attracted the attention of predators. As Brenda was queuing at the entrance to the departure terminal, a small commotion occurred in front of her. Someone dropped a stack of boxes, blocking the path. Brenda snorted in annoyance, her attention momentarily diverted to scold the person who dropped the items. In that very brief moment, she felt a strong tug on her shoulder. The leather handbag containing all her remaining wealth was forcibly snatched by someone. Brenda was shocked. She turned and saw a thin young man running fast through the crowd with her bag. Brenda's scream shattered the noise of the terminal. She shrieked hysterically, "Mugger! Thief! Help! My bag! My valuables!" She tried to chase him, but the large suitcase and Patty's heavy package hindered her movement. She fell to the dirty pavement, scraping her knee, but she didn't care about the pain. She continued to scream like a madwoman, begging people to chase the mugger. A few terminal security guards and police officers on duty immediately approached, not to chase the mugger who had already disappeared into the crowd, but to control the situation that was becoming chaotic due to Brenda's hysterical screams. Brenda wailed in front of the police. She told them that inside the bag were gold, diamonds, and tens of thousands of dollars. She demanded the police arrest the culprit immediately. The police tried to calm her down and asked her to come to the security post to file an official report. Breathing heavily, and with her appearance now disheveled, her hairpiece askew, her clothes dirty from the street, Brenda dragged her suitcase and Patty's package to the post. Inside the air-conditioned post, the police began to question her identity and travel purpose. Standard inspection procedures were carried out. The police asked Brenda to open all her luggage to be documented as evidence of what she had with her at the time of the incident. At first, Brenda refused on the grounds of privacy, but the police insisted. Reluctantly, she opened her suitcase of clothes. Nothing seemed unusual. Then a police officer pointed to the brown tape tote bag she had placed on the floor. The officer asked what was inside. Brenda confidently replied that it was just herbal remedies and supplements from a friend. The officer, suspicious of the overly sealed package, asked for permission to open it. One of the officers took a utility knife and sliced through the thick layer of duct tape. When the package was opened, the officers' faces turned tense. Inside were not bottles of supplements or packs of herbs, but bag after bag of white powder and thousands of colorful pills packed in transparent plastic. A distinct chemical smell immediately filled the air. They were illegal drugs, a very large quantity, enough to sentence the owner to life imprisonment or even the death penalty. Brenda's eyes nearly popped out of their sockets. Her face went deathly pale in an instant. The blood seemed to drain from her body. She shook her head frantically, backing away until her back hit the wall. She screamed denials, saying it wasn't hers, it belonged to Patty. She had been set up. However, the police didn't care about her denials. The physical evidence was in her possession. She was the one carrying it, and she couldn't prove the existence of Patty, whose phone number suddenly became inactive when the police tried to call it right then. Patty was just a pseudonym for a syndicate that looked for foolish couriers to sacrifice, and Brenda, with her greed, was the perfect target. In that instant, Brenda's status changed from a victim of purse snatching to a suspect in a major drug trafficking case. The police immediately handcuffed her. Brenda struggled, screaming Kevin's name, screaming the name of her late husband, even screaming Amelia's name to help her. Her tears mixed with her smeared makeup, making her look like a pathetic clown. Karma had come for her in the most brutal way. She had intended to flee and abandon her suffering son, but now she had fallen into a much deeper, darker hole. Her wealth was stolen, her freedom was stripped away, and now she faced the threat of a life sentence. In the cold interrogation room, Brenda finally collapsed, unable to bear the weight of the destruction she had created herself. 3 months had passed since Kevin was dragged out of the executive conference room in handcuffs. 3 months that felt like 3 centuries to Kevin. Life in the county jail was a living hell he had never imagined. Kevin was placed in an overcrowded cell with various types of criminals, from petty thieves to hardened gang members. There was no more soft mattress, no cool air conditioning, no delicious food. There was only a cold, damp concrete floor, the pungent smell of urine from a rarely cleaned toilet, and a ration of bland prison slop with questionable side dishes that were often spoiled. However, the physical torment was nothing compared to the mental anguish he endured. In prison, the power hierarchy was brutal. Kevin, who came in with the status of a former boss in a suit and still carried remnants of his arrogance in the early days, immediately became an easy target for the long-term inmates. His arrogance was mercilessly crushed. He, who used to yell at employees and curse at Amelia, now became an errand boy for his cell block's leader. He was forced to massage the feet of tattooed gangsters, wash other inmates' clothes, and clean the toilet with his bare hands. Every time he tried to resist or refuse, punches and kicks would land on his body in a corner of the cell, out of reach of the surveillance cameras. His body was now painfully thin. His face was gaunt with prominent cheekbones, and his skin was covered in bruises and sores from poor sanitation. Every night, Kevin would curl up in the dirtiest corner of the cell, crying silently. He still harbored the naive hope that his mother would come to save him. He thought perhaps Brenda was busy selling assets or finding a top lawyer out there. He didn't know that his mother herself was languishing in a women's prison in a different city for a much more serious crime. This ignorance made him keep hoping, and that empty hope slowly eroded his sanity. He would often mutter to himself, blaming Amelia for all his suffering. In his distorted mind, Amelia was a disobedient wife who conspired to bring him down. He had not yet reached the point of realizing his own mistakes. He was still in a pathetic stage of denial. One scorching afternoon, the inmates were given a break in the prison's common area. This was the only time they could see the outside world through an old tube television enclosed in a metal cage hung high on the wall. Kevin sat alone in a corner of the common area, eating his meal with trembling hands, avoiding eye contact with other inmates to avoid another beating. The television was tuned to a national business news channel. Usually, this channel was boring for the inmates, who preferred music videos or soap operas. But this time, the remote was controlled by a guard who wanted to watch the news. Suddenly, Kevin's ears caught a name that was very familiar, mentioned by the news anchor, the Blackwell Group. Kevin's head snapped up. His eyes were glued to the grainy television screen. On the screen, a large headline was written, "Heiress to Blackwell fortune, Amelia Blackwell, takes over leadership and inaugurates major charitable housing project." Kevin's heart skipped a beat. On the screen was a magnificent stage with a backdrop of skyscrapers. At the main podium stood a woman he knew very well. It was Amelia. But the Amelia on the screen looked very different from the Amelia he used to know in the apartment. The Amelia on TV wore a very elegant, professional Muslimah business attire. The fabric looked expensive, and the cut was perfect. Her face glowed with authority and intelligence. Beside her stood Harrison Blackwell, smiling proudly, and several government officials who were also present at the inauguration. The camera zoomed in on Amelia's face as she gave her speech. Her voice sounded clear and firm through the television's crackling speaker. "We believe that wealth is a trust," Amelia said on the screen. "Honesty and integrity are the foundations of our business. We do not tolerate deceit, because blessings will not come from the suffering of others." Those words slapped Kevin harder than any physical blow he had ever received in prison. His eyes didn't blink. His mouth hung open. The food he was chewing fell from his mouth. His brain replayed all his past memories at high speed, like a film in reverse. He remembered how simple Amelia used to be. He remembered how Amelia never complained despite living frugally. He remembered how intelligent Amelia was in managing her small shop's finances. And most painfully, he remembered the moment when Harrison came to their apartment. Those shabby clothes, that simple question, "Why don't you just live in your beautiful house, dear?" It turned out that wasn't the question of a senile old man hallucinating. It was a literal question. The beautiful house was real. The wealth was real. And the woman standing at the podium, the woman being greeted by high-ranking state officials, the woman being praised as one of the most influential businesswomen in the country, was the same woman he had ordered to wash dishes on the kitchen floor during his mother's party. The same woman he divorced to chase after false wealth and his mother's ego. Kevin trembled violently. The plastic cup in his hand fell and spilled. An immense and devastating wave of regret hit his chest, making him feel short of breath. It wasn't regret for hurting Amelia's heart, but a monstrous, greedy material regret. He realized he had just thrown away a winning lottery ticket for a lifetime. He had held a diamond in his hand, but he threw it into the gutter, thinking it was just a piece of glass, and then ran after a worthless rock he thought was gold. This foolishness felt so absolute and unforgivable. Kevin suddenly screamed hysterically in the middle of the crowded common area. "That's my wife! That's my wife! She's my wife!" he screamed, pointing at the TV screen like a madman. The other inmates turned, looked at him strangely, and then laughed mockingly. "Yeah, right. In your dreams, man. A woman like that would never be with a gutter rat like you," one of the inmates jeered. "No, I swear, she's Amelia. I'm her husband. I should own all of that. I should be the one up there," Kevin roared, trying to run towards the TV, as if wanting to enter the screen and reclaim that position. But his legs were tripped by another inmate. Kevin fell onto the dirty common area floor, his face hitting leftover food, but he didn't care. He continued to cry and scream Amelia's name and the numbers of the money that had slipped from his grasp. The guards came and dragged away the out-of-control Kevin. Kevin struggled, his eyes still fixed on the TV screen, which now showed Amelia cutting the inauguration ribbon, accompanied by a handsome young man, Adrian, who looked at Amelia with great admiration. That sight was the final nail in Kevin's coffin. He was dragged back to a solitary confinement cell for causing a disturbance. Inside the dark, silent cell, Kevin repeatedly banged his head against the wall. He used physical pain to distract from the pain in his soul. The visions of luxury, sedans, mansions, and the honor he could have enjoyed if only he had been kind to his father-in-law now danced before his eyes, tormenting him endlessly. He realized his greatest enemy was not Amelia, not Harrison, and not the police. His greatest enemy was his own greed and arrogance. And now he had to pay the price for that arrogance with the rest of his ruined life, rotting in prison while watching the woman he threw away soar high into the sky. Time turns cruelly for the greedy, but flows beautifully for the patient. While Kevin rotted in prison with his belated regrets, Brenda's fate was no better, perhaps even more pitiful in a different, ironic way. After a long and exhausting legal process, Brenda was finally released from the women's prison. She was lucky, or perhaps unlucky, to have to continue her life in disgrace. The court ruled that she was merely a victim of a drug syndicate's deception, a foolish courier who did not know the contents of the package she was carrying. Her testimony, which helped dismantle Patty's network, earned her a significant reduction in her sentence. However, that freedom was not a ticket to a better life. Brenda walked out of the prison gates to find no one waiting for her. No family, no socialite friends, and certainly no Kevin. She stepped out in the same clothes she was arrested in months ago, now shabby and musty. Her wealth was gone without a trace. The luxury house she was once so proud of had long been seized. Savings, jewelry, everything was gone. Her name was ruined. No one would hire an ex-convict from a drug case, even if she was just a courier. Brenda was officially homeless in the city she once considered her stage. Her days were now spent wandering from one storefront to another. Her stomach, which once only accepted food from expensive restaurants, now had to make peace with leftovers from trash cans or the charity of passers-by. Her arrogance was slowly eroded by gnawing hunger. However, her envious nature remained, like a chronic disease. She would often sit pensively on the roadside, staring at the luxury cars passing by with a dazed look, imagining that if Kevin hadn't been so foolish, if Amelia hadn't fought back, she would still be sitting comfortably in one of those air-conditioned cars. She never once blamed her own greed. One bright afternoon, Brenda's stomach growled loudly. She hadn't eaten since yesterday. Her blistered feet carried her aimlessly until she reached an elite event hall complex downtown. She used to dream of holding Kevin's wedding here. The venue looked particularly grand and busy today. A beautiful floral arch curved over the entrance, adorned with fresh flowers whose fragrance wafted all the way to the street. a line of gleaming luxury sedans dropped off elegantly dressed guests. Brenda stopped across the street, hiding behind a tree. Her eyes stared hungrily not just at the opulence, but at the aroma of roasted lamb and curry that drifted on the wind from the building. Hunger overcame her shame. Her cunning mind began to work. A party this lavish must be hosted by rich, generous people, she thought. At the very least, I can sneak in through the back to steal dirty plates with leftovers. Or, more daringly, I could pretend to be a beggar praying for the newlyweds to get some charity. With faltering steps, Brenda crossed the street. She tried to smooth her tangled hair and dust off her stained clothes, but it was futile. She still looked like a homeless person. As she approached the side gate, she saw a gigantic floral display. The writing on it made her stop in her tracks, as if struck by lightning on a clear day. Congratulations on the wedding of Amelia Blackwell and Adrian Mahendra. Brenda froze, her mouth agape in disbelief. She rubbed her blurry eyes, hoping she had misread. But the golden letters were clear. Amelia, the daughter-in-law she had once insulted, trampled on, and thrown out like a stray cat, was getting married today in the most luxurious venue in the city, to a man whose name often appeared in business magazines as the most successful young CEO. Her chest tightened with a burning envy. This party should have been her son's. The name next to Amelia's should have been Kevin's. She should have been the one standing there, greeting guests as the tycoon's mother-in-law, not a beggar peeking from behind a fence. That envy turned into a crazy recklessness. Brenda felt she still had some right. She felt she was the former mother-in-law who had done the service of taking Amelia in. With her deranged logic, she thought maybe Amelia would take pity on her condition. Or maybe Harrison would give her hush money to avoid a scene. She walked towards the main entrance, pushing through the queue of fragrant guests. Of course, before she even reached the lobby, 2 large security guards in black safari suits immediately blocked her. Brenda's unwashed scent made the guests around her cover their noses and move away with disgusted looks. "Excuse me, ma'am, you can't enter. This is a private event," one guard said firmly, but still tried to be polite, assuming she was just an ordinary beggar. Brenda flew into a rage. She screamed in a hoarse voice, "Get out of my way! Do you know who I am? I am the bride's mother-in-law. I'm Amelia's mother-in-law. Get Amelia out here. I want to see my daughter-in-law." Her shouting attracted a lot of attention. Some guests whispered and recorded the incident on their phones. The guards looked at each other and then chuckled dismissively. Amelia's mother-in-law? She's Harrison Blackwell's only daughter, and her husband is Adrian Mahendra. Don't make things up, lady. Go away before we have to drag you. I'm not lying. Amelia was my son's wife. Call her. She'll want to see me. She owes me. Brenda continued to struggle, trying to break through the guard's strong arms. The commotion grew louder, reaching the reception area. Suddenly, the crowd of guests in the lobby parted. The atmosphere became quiet. From inside the building emerged Harrison Blackwell. He was wearing a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. His face was calm but radiated an aura of authority that made everyone bow their heads in respect. Beside him stood Daniel, his loyal assistant. Harrison walked slowly down the lobby stairs towards the commotion. Seeing Harrison, Brenda's courage, which had been blazing moments ago, suddenly shriveled. She remembered that face, the face of the old man she had kicked out of the apartment, who was now looking at her as if she were a tiny, annoying insect. Brenda trembled. Her mouth was locked shut. Harrison stopped 3 steps in front of Brenda. He wasn't angry. He didn't shout. He just looked Brenda up and down with a bone-chillingly cold gaze. "What is all this noise on my daughter's happy day?" he asked softly, but his voice was crystal clear in the silence. Brenda forced a smile, a pathetic, pale smile. "Mr. Blackwell, sir. It's me, Brenda, Kevin's mother. I just wanted to say congratulations and, well, I haven't eaten in 2 days, sir. Please, for old time's sake." Her voice trailed off at the end. Her pride completely collapsed for a bite of food. Harrison smiled faintly, very faintly. "Old time's sake?" he repeated. "The old times where you insulted my daughter? The old times where you ordered my daughter to pick up food from the floor?" Brenda turned pale. She didn't expect Harrison to remember the details of that incident. "Daniel," Harrison called without turning his head. "Yes, sir," Daniel replied promptly. "This guest is hungry. Give her a meal that is fitting for her, according to the standard she once gave my daughter." Daniel nodded in understanding. He went to the back of the security post for a moment and returned with a styrofoam food container. But it wasn't a fresh meal. It was a security guard's half-eaten lunch. There were gnawed chicken bones and a little rice soaked in cold gravy. Daniel handed the container to Brenda. "Here you go, ma'am. This is your meal for today," Daniel said flatly. Brenda stared at the leftover food in her hand. Tears streamed down her face. She was humiliated in front of hundreds of rich people. She was treated exactly as she had treated Amelia during the party at her luxury house. Karma hadn't just arrived. It had slapped her across the face, repeatedly. "Take her away." "Don't let her spoil the view any longer," Harrison commanded, then turned around and walked back into the party without a second glance. The security guards immediately dragged Brenda away from the venue. Brenda didn't resist anymore. Her energy was gone. She was dragged to the dark edge of the main road. There, under a dim streetlight, Brenda sat on her knees, holding the box of leftover food. Her hunger was so intense that she had no other choice. Sobbing, with trembling hands, she began to eat the leftover rice. Every swallow felt like swallowing thorns. In the distance, she heard the sound of loud applause and orchestral music from inside the building, signaling the peak of Amelia's happiness while she was plunged into the abyss of humiliation she had dug for herself. 5 years is a long time, enough to change the face of the world. But for Kevin, those 5 years were a long journey through a corridor of time filled with mental torment. That morning, the main gate of the state penitentiary swung open. Kevin stepped out, breathing free air for the first time after half a decade of confinement. But the free air didn't feel fresh to him. It felt heavy and oppressive. Kevin was no longer the arrogant, well-dressed young man. His body was now thin and bony, his back slightly stooped, and his hair was full of gray even though he wasn't very old. His face was hard and dull, marked with deep lines of suffering. He had lost a tooth in a prison fight during his first year. He carried only a black plastic bag with 2 pieces of worn-out clothing. No one was there to pick him up. He had heard from a fellow inmate that his mother, Brenda, had passed away a year ago on the streets from a severe, untreated lung disease. The news left Kevin's heart numb. He was now truly alone in the world. Kevin tried to start a new life, but his status as an ex-convict for corporate embezzlement got him rejected everywhere. He applied to be a security guard and was turned down. He applied to be a store clerk and was chased away. Even when applying for construction work, he was often suspected of wanting to steal cement. Ultimately, he became a drifter, sleeping in storefronts and eating from the charity of others. The arrogance of his past had been ground to dust. He often reflected, imagining the face of Amelia, the only woman who had ever truly loved him, whom he had thrown away for blind ambition. One day, while collecting plastic bottles in a city park, a middle-aged man approached him. The man offered him a job. A temp agency was looking for a gardener and pool cleaner for a large house in an elite suburban area. The requirements were minimal: willing to work hard, be honest, and not talk much. The pay was decent, enough for food and to rent a small room. Kevin, who was desperate, accepted the offer immediately. He felt God had finally shown him a little mercy. Kevin was taken to a very exclusive residential area. The house where he was to work was not just a house, but a modern mansion, an estate surrounded by high walls and vast gardens. Kevin's job was to sweep the acres of grounds, trim the grass, and clean the swimming pool every morning. He worked diligently. He didn't want to lose this chance. He kept his head down, not daring to look at his employers, and obeyed all orders from the head butler. He didn't know who owned the house, and he didn't care. For him, being able to eat a warm meal 3 times a day was a luxury. Months passed. Kevin worked in silence. He found a strange peace in the routine of sweeping dry leaves. However, one thing always bothered him. Every time he saw the luxury of this house, he was reminded of the house he had once seized from Amelia. This house was much larger, much grander. He imagined how happy the people who lived here must be. One bright afternoon, Kevin was scrubbing algae from the edge of the main swimming pool located in the backyard. The pool was beautiful, with crystal clear blue water reflecting the evening sky. Suddenly, he heard the soft purr of a car engine approaching the carport next to the garden. It was the sound of a very expensive luxury car. Kevin moved aside, intending to stay out of his employer's sight as instructed by the head butler, but he stopped when he heard the crisp laughter of young children. "Grandpa! Grandpa's on the porch!" a small child exclaimed. Kevin glanced over, curious. From a long, black limousine, a handsome and dapper man, Adrian, stepped out. He opened the door for a very elegant woman. The woman wore a long pastel-colored dress with a matching scarf. Her face radiated a perfect maternal glow and happiness. Kevin felt his heart stop. The broom in his hand slipped and fell to the ground with a loud clatter. The woman was Amelia. Amelia looked even more beautiful than she had 5 years ago. She looked mature, calm, and full of love. She was holding the hands of 2 small children, a boy and a girl, who ran joyfully towards the house's porch. On the magnificent porch, Harrison Blackwell sat in his rocking chair, opening his arms to welcome his grandchildren. "Amelia," Kevin whispered unconsciously. His voice was hoarse and trembling. The sound of the falling broom had caught Adrian's attention. He turned towards the pool and then whispered something to Amelia. Amelia turned slowly. Her eyes met Kevin's. Kevin held his breath. He expected Amelia to be angry, to curse him, or at least show an expression of hatred. He was ready to accept that anger, but what happened was far more painful than hatred. Amelia looked at him blankly. There was no flash of anger, no revenge, but also no recognition. Her gaze was empty. It was as if Kevin were just a stone statue or a dry tree in her garden, as if Kevin had never existed in the history of her life. Amelia just gave a brief, polite nod, the kind a homeowner gives to an unfamiliar servant, and then turned back to smile sweetly at her husband and children. She turned her back, walked into her warm, palatial home, leaving Kevin frozen by the pool. That gesture shattered Kevin into a million pieces. He realized that to Amelia, he was no one anymore. He wasn't even worthy of being hated, because to hate someone, you have to remember them. Amelia had completely erased Kevin from her memory. Kevin was just insignificant dust. As Kevin stood there, frozen, with tears starting to stream down his dirty cheeks, Harrison Blackwell walked slowly towards him. The old man still looked imposing, though his hair was now completely white. He stood beside Kevin, also looking towards the house's door that had just closed. "How's your work, Kevin? Is the pay enough?" Harrison asked in a low voice, without a hint of mockery, but full of oppressing power. Kevin fell to his knees. He kissed Harrison's feet, sobbing uncontrollably. "Dad, I'm sorry. Forgive me. I was wrong. I regret it." Harrison didn't pull his foot away, but he didn't help him up either. He let Kevin cry on the ground. "Don't call me Dad. You threw that right away 5 years ago." Harrison sighed deeply, looking at the evening sky. "Do you know why you were able to get a job here? That temp agency belongs to my company. I was the one who told them to hire you. I was the one who told the head butler to put you in this garden." Kevin looked up, his face wet with tears and snot. "Why? Why would you do this? Why didn't you just let me die on the streets?" Harrison looked down, meeting Kevin's eyes. "Because death is too easy, Kevin. The best punishment for an ungrateful person isn't prison. It's regret." Harrison pointed towards the large living room window. Through it, the silhouettes of Amelia, Adrian, and their children could be seen, laughing happily under a warm crystal chandelier, a picture of a perfect family. "I want you to work here for the rest of your life. I won't fire you. I will give you food and a place to live. But in return, every day, every morning, every evening, you will have to see that view," Harrison said in a final tone. "You will have to see the woman you once threw away being treated like a queen by a man far better than you. You will have to see the children that could have been yours calling another man Dad. Enjoy that regret every second until the end of your days. That is your hell on earth." Harrison turned and walked away, leaving Kevin alone in the emptiness. Kevin looked at the window again. He saw Amelia's unrestrained laughter, a laugh that once belonged to him, but which he had silenced with tears. The pain was so real, tearing at his heart. He knew he couldn't leave. He had nowhere else to go. He was trapped in this golden cage, an eternal spectator to the happiness of others, built on the ruins of his own past. With a trembling hand, Kevin picked up his leaf broom again. Under the darkening evening sky, he began to sweep the dry leaves, accompanied only by the shadows of his past and a regret that would never end. His tears fell, watering the ground, but they would never be able to bring back the love he had killed with his own hands.